From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. USDA's cattle inventory numbers are out, and it shows scars of the drought continue to weigh on ranchers.
Yeah, it's the lowest beef cow herd that we've seen since NASS started making its official recordings back in 1972.
As beef cow inventory reached the lowest point since 1972. So what it means for prices in the months ahead. Sustainable aviation fuel may be taking off. Which airline is paying up for corn ethanol? $600 per acre cash rent.
Well, I would say we're not driving up cash rental rates. It's your fellow farmers that are actually being more competitive, more aggressive.
A new way to cash rent is gaining traction across the U.S. We'll tell you why. And in John's world,
the changing economics of gasoline.
Now for the news, the Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA trade show happening this week in New Orleans. The industry looking ahead after a year that saw many producers bring their cattle to market early due to drought. And that is the talk of this year's convention, the size of the beef herd, which is continuing to shrink. USDA just releasing its twice yearly cattle inventory report, and the numbers are breaking records. The report shows there are 89.3 million head of cattle. That's down 3% from last January. And most of the rest of the numbers, those are down as well, with all cows and heifers that have calved down 3%, all heifers 500 pounds and over down 4%, and beef replacement heifers, those are down 6%. The numbers are all pointing to more signs that water, feed, and pasture conditions continue to be tight.
Yeah, it's the lowest beef cow herd that we've seen since NASS started making its official recordings back in 1972. So it's the lowest on record. Since then, it moves below the low point of 2014.
The 2022 calf crop is also down 2%. Schmal says with that being on a decline, he does not see a rebuilding of the herd anytime soon. Other news important to the cattle production, the U.S. is now requesting a second USMCA dispute panel to probe the revised Canadian dairy TRQ plan. U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai announcing the formal request. It comes after revisions to the tariff rate quotas following an earlier dispute panel ruling failed to bring Canada into compliance with the PAC's dairy market access provisions. Now, Canada's Minister of International Trade criticized the call for a second panel, saying it will continue to defend its supply management system, as well as the market access that Canada and the U.S. have agreed on. Well, another potential trade issue that the U.S. is watching, Mexico's proposed ban on GMO corn. But now Mexico is placing a temporary 50% tariff on its white corn exports. The Mexican government issuing a decree saying it would be in place until June 30th. The country attempting to control rising prices of the commodity. The decree saying, quote, in order to guarantee a sufficient supply, it's necessary to maintain national production in our country and ensure market conditions that allow stabilization of its price, end quote. It says white corn makes up 89% of its grain production. Much of it is in the form of tortillas. Its reported prices for tortillas shot up 19% last year. You'll remember the U.S. and Mexico are currently in negotiations over the country's plan to ban imports of U.S. GMO corn by up to 40% by 2024. Well, sustainable aviation fuel could soon be taking off. United Airlines is teaming up with a corn ethanol maker in order to ramp up production of its green jet fuel. United Airlines and biofuels producer Green Plains and energy infrastructure firm Tallgrass Energy Partners are all investing up to $50 million to form Blue Blade Energy. Its goal is to create technology that would simplify making sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, from feedstock and bring it to market by 2028. The venture centers around the idea that ethanol will beat out other commodities like vegetable oil as a preferred ingredient for making green jet fuel. Market analysts continue to revise what meeting these goals will ultimately mean for farmers.
The RVO came down from EPA back in December, late November, December, and so that adjusted our acreage a little bit. We now think it's somewhere between 14 or 15 million acres additional that we need by 2026, looking forward in terms of soybean acres. But that demand pull for acres is so large. We have reached peak farmland in the United States. There are no more extra acres unless we start seeing a release from the CRP program.
United Airlines Venture president says the initial investment is for testing. If that's a success, then hundreds of millions in financing would be needed to build an initial production plant. That's followed by a facility that could start operating by 2028. That's it for the news. Well, icy weather crippling parts of the South this week. So what is meteorologist Andrew Whitmire watching next week? It's brutal cold. We'll tell you where that will hit coming up next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Duracade Viptera.
Well, meteorologist Andrew Whitmire joining us now with weather. Andrew, the ice was the weather story of the week, but it's brutally cold temps that you're now watching. Just how cold could it get?
And time we finally start to see the weather becoming less active, at least short term here across pockets of the deep south and southern plains, where we continue to have that ice built up throughout much of this past week. Looking at the temperature range here for the rest of February, and it looks like we're going to have some more above average, more warmer temperatures likely across the eastern half of the country. We're below average temperatures, slightly cooler temperatures for this time of year throughout the month of February. We'll likely take aim at the western coast and right across the plain states. Likely going to be the battleground here. We'll be watching for any dips in the jet stream that could hopefully usher in some cooler pockets of air, and hopefully that could lead to a few more bursts of some snow systems for those that are needing their winter fix across the lower 48. Let's take a look at the updated drought monitor just released on January 31st, taking into account the moisture. And as we take a look here across at least eastern Michigan, really starting to see some even signs of a severe drought starting to really ramp up across the eastern half of Michigan here. And that's all thanks to really the lack of snow systems. Meanwhile, we go down across the central plains. We're talking parts of Nebraska, parts of Kansas, as well as parts of Oklahoma as well. Really not seeing much moisture so far this winter, and that has led to an extreme to an exceptional drought here. And unless we get any dips in the jet stream, I really don't expect this to change much here throughout the month of February. And we're going to be looking for things to change hopefully fast here as we head into early spring of March and April before we get into this upcoming season's growing season. Let's take a look at the root zone map just released again. And again, we take a look at where that ice storm was set up, that winter system across the deep south southern plains. Notice how we got some blues indicating again soil is wet down there. Meanwhile, again, we continue to watch the heartland of the country, where those soils are rather on the dry side. Precipitation this week, we're going to be watching the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley for a few systems that will bring with it a chance for rain, mainly as we head towards the mid portion of this week. Meanwhile, as we head towards mid-month, well, we keep the green pretty much where it's been centered. We'll be watching again some battleground areas where we will have some dips in the jet stream, and that'll keep the above average precipitation down across the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley, which is where all winter long we have kind of kept that above average precipitation across the heartland. Walking to the jet stream as we look for any types of dips here in the jet, any types of little few troughs coming on through. Well, it doesn't look like we're going to get much of it. We're going to be looking at a few waves of ridges that'll be building throughout this first full week of February. Walking through the forecast, Monday, February 6th, we'll be watching a few systems out west that'll eventually give way to ongoing moisture chances across the Midwest and Great Lakes states and even parts of the deep south by Wednesday. And that'll eventually work its way off the shoreline there, the East Coast, once we round out this week.
Well, moisture in some of the areas of the west and the plains is promising, but drought is still having a big impact on cattle producers across the country, and cattle inventory numbers are low. But is contraction even more than cattle analysts expected? Terrain Ag's Don Close and Oklahoma State's Daryl Peel join me for our marketing roundtables next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Golden Harvest. Broad adaptability, high yield potential, solid agronomics, great late season health. The foundations of a successful season start with Golden Harvest game-changing corn. Find your hybrid at GameChangingCorn.com.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Daryl Peel as well as Don Close joining us. Don is at Cattlemen's Convention this week. A lot of talk about cattle supplies, especially with this cattle inventory report. Don, I'll start with you. Are supplies even tighter than what analysts in the trade expected?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think we've been a little bit misled because of the cattle on feed numbers still at 100%. But if you look at the numbers behind that and what's available for replacement cattle as we go through 2023, I think that supply is going to contract at a substantially faster rate than what we've been expecting.
We've had 4 years of liquidation here, Daryl. So do you expect that theme to continue, and for how long?
Well, we're still in a drought, and so it really is in the hands of Mother Nature. We're smaller than we need to be now from the standpoint of the market. So the industry would be happy to stop contracting at this point, but I think it just hinges on the drought. We've got lots of winter weather going on right now. We've got folks that aren't sure they can hang on to their cows through the winter with tight hay supplies, and then depending on what spring looks like from a drought standpoint, the liquidation may continue or it may not.
Yeah, Daryl, mentioned that winter weather. We are seeing some more moisture in some of these areas. We know what happened in California, but Don, is it enough to really change the outlook, or is drought still at play here for these cattle producers?
Drought's still the primary driver. The one surprise to me in the report, I thought potentially in the Southeast complex, I thought possibly in the Dakotas, eastern Montana, I thought we could see some regionalization of some effort for heifer retention. But the report to me, it just shows the gas tank empty in all classes of cattle. And so I'd say the biggest surprise for me going into that report is there's been absolutely zero heifer retention to this time. And I agree with Daryl. We don't have the green light to move forward yet.
So Daryl, then when you look at some of those other numbers that were in this cattle inventory report, how many years do you think we are going to be dealing with this? I know it all hinges on drought, but when you look just straight at the numbers today, and as Don said, there's not a lot of gas in this tank. How long do you think this is going to be a story for this cattle herd?
I think Don's absolutely right. If you look at the replacement heifer number, it's broken down into the heifers that are going to calve this year, and then you subtract out, and that implies the number of heifer calves that are in development. Both of those numbers are substantially lower, and I think that's a difference from what we went through about a decade ago with the last drought. Is it's going to take longer to rebuild this time, because I do think the gas tank is empty. It's going to take longer to develop heifers for breeding. And when you look at the biologics of the way the cattle industry works, it's going to take longer than it did the last time, certainly in terms of our ability to rebuild the herd and get beef production back up once it comes down here going forward.
All right, Don, then hearing that outlook for both you and Daryl, what are your projections on prices? Do you think we will see record cattle prices this year?
I don't think there's any question about it. If we look at the low 170 level on fed cattle that we saw at the peak of the 2014, 2015 market, I think before this one's done, we will go through those old historical highs with gusto. And I to support that, I still think we're working with a very solid demand base under the market, which is only going to exacerbate this whole situation.
All right, Daryl, what about you? Record prices this year? Do you agree?
Yeah, it's certainly, we're trending up. We have been trending up. That will continue. The real spike in prices will come when we do start that rebuilding process and we do start retaining heifers. That's what squeezes slaughter in the short run. That we're not sure when that's going to happen. It still depends on the drought, but it could certainly start this year. And, it's either late 2023 or into 2024 when we get that real spike in prices. And Don's absolutely right. There's no doubt we will see record prices for both feeder cattle and fed cattle.
All right, but what about demand? We're going to get into that coming up here on U.S. Farm Report. Well, President Biden tweeting out this photo this week saying the Great American Road Trip is going to be fully electrified, and saying a $7,500 tax credit will help more Americans make the switch. With the obvious push to electrify the auto industry, has gasoline demand peaked. Here's John Phipps.
High inflation seems to have withdrawal time. Even though the trend has been down for about a year, it still ranks as a top problem in the minds of many Americans. I think some of this is forgetting that even if inflation is slowing, overall prices don't go down, they just go up more slowly. Some prices, notably energy and food, do both rise and fall, but the overall cost of living rarely drops. Right now, gasoline and eggs dominate our thinking about inflation. They are things we buy frequently, keeping them in our mind. Now, the good news is gasoline is about where it was before the Ukraine war exploded the energy markets. There is a longer-term issue here, however. We likely have passed peak gasoline consumption, and while you might think that would lower oil prices, oil companies are way ahead of us. To be fair, when refiners see gasoline production virtually stop growing in 2007 and predictions of slowly declining consumption from the EIA, there is little incentive to refine more or build more plants. This is not about EVs either. Less than 1% of the cars on the road are electric. It's caused by improved mileage from ever more efficient engines. As older cars are replaced, the fleet mileage curve is locked into an uptrend. There are signs that vehicle miles may have plateaued as well. These developments are not news to the oil industry, and it's a reason no new refineries will likely ever be built in the U.S. In fact, to keep existing refineries running at efficient capacity, U.S. refiners have relied upon exports to replace fading domestic demand. It's kind of like corn. It is good business for gasoline refiners to manage production to match demand forecasts. Older, smaller refineries are simply being shut down, therefore reducing future refining capacity and providing little idle capacity for any demand surprises. The bottom line for consumers as EVs become more popular, reduced gas demand will likely not lower prices as refiners will constrict supply. In fact, supplies will probably decrease slightly faster than demand, keeping prices high. Any small mismatch between supply and demand, then, would cause considerable price volatility. This dispels one misconception I had, that EVs would lower gas prices. They will, eventually, but refiners are prepared. Strong gasoline prices, though, will aid the economics of electrification as well as turnover to more efficient conventional vehicles.
Thanks so much, John. And don't forget, you can watch more of John's commentary on the Farm Journal YouTube page or also on agweb.com. All right, when we come back, we're checking in with Machinery Pete for some classic iron. Tractor Tales is next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Perfected in conventional, excels in no-till. Order 12 to 16 rows today and qualify for free shipping or 20% off an End Zone Moisture Management Package. Tractor Tales on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Farmall. 100 years of milestones, community, and memories. Since 1923, it's been the one for all. Celebrate with Case IH at rightredtractor.com.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week we're headed to Minnesota to check out a family-owned Farmall C.
This was our dad's, so we all grew up on this tractor pretty much, you know, and this was basically the main workhorse for years on the farm. It had mounted corn planter on it and the mower and raked hay with it, about anything that needed to be cultivator. So it did a lot of work around here. This one's been all restored by a guy over by Elgin, Minnesota. He did the mower, and he's done a lot of my tractors already and does an excellent job on them. And priced a little higher than some, but I guess you get what you pay for, right? That's original tires on it and everything yet, so I mean it's pretty good for that day and age, you know. They're about 18 horse they are. You know, they ain't real powerful, but for a little tractor, you know, they really pull more than their weight. Had a 2-bottom plow for it, and I think the brother Bill, he was plowing with it when he was 6, 7 years old, he said, so that tells you how far back it was. That's the first tractor I planted corn with a 4-row planter when I got out of high school. Dad said it was time for me to plant corn, so 4-row planter in the sea, you thought you had a big outfit. Yeah, I'd say it's probably my favorite one. Oh, just that it was Dad's, and he managed to keep on to it. Oh, I think it's, after we're gone, I'm hoping one of my boys or somebody will keep it around.
Don't forget to check out more Tractor Tales on our Tractor Tales Facebook page or also Farm Journal YouTube. Well, $600 cash rent in Illinois, why a new way to cash rent is gaining traction in the auction space. That's our Farm Journal report next.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, land prices have posted record prices, but what about cash rent? It's a market that's seen a rapid change. One reason, a new way to cash rent. This weekend in our Farm Journal report, we explore the concept of cash rent auctions and why it's taking off across the U.S. As farmers make planting preparations, cash rent negotiations are also underway. And with the little information available, it appears cash rent prices are on the rise.
Before it was word of mouth, coffee shop, how do I find a different farmer? Now every farmer in our database, as soon as a farm is listed, it is pushed out to every tenant farmer that's registered with us within a 60-mile radius.
Chris Bauman is the CEO and founder of Common Ground, which was formerly known as CashRent.com, a company that facilitates cash rent auctions online.
Over the last 2.5 years, our average landowner experiences roughly 39.5% increase in ROI. We've seen some contracts that haven't been negotiated in years. They've gone from 60% all the way up to 120% increase in ROI.
The highest cash rent auction price with Common Ground happened this month in Illinois. A landowner who lives in Arkansas listed a portion of his ground that he owns in Fulton County, Illinois.
Previously, I think he was getting around $260 an acre. And he put it up, he wound up getting $495 as a high bid.
Impressed with the price, he decided to try again.
So immediately the next day he put his next piece up, and that wound up getting $620 an acre, which was absolutely unheard of in the area.
That $620 per acre is the highest price Common Ground has seen since the company started only a few years ago. Jim Rothermich, a land appraiser in Iowa, is watching the cash rent market explode and starting to track cash rent data as it becomes available.
And what we're finding out is the demand to rent farms far exceeds supplies, and the rent goes up exponentially when it's exposed to the market.
But he says not every farm will win in this new environment.
An auction is true price discovery. If you are a high cost renter, you're above your break-even points are high compared to the average, and you're not a good steward of the land, you are going to lose in this environment.
Rothermich says as record farmland sales make headlines, it's sparking interest among landowners who are now questioning if they're getting enough for cash rent.
That's what's getting the questions going is they're seeing these high land prices and their income on their farm hasn't changed.
While Iowa has been the hot spot for record farmland prices, Rothermich says it's Illinois that's leading the charge for record cash rent.
There's farms that's over there that's went from, the $300 an acre range to $600 an acre rent for 3-year term.
And recent cash rent auctions are proof. Take a look at this, $500 per acre for cash rent in McLean County, Illinois. The previous amount, $235 per acre. Or this auction in Fremont County, Iowa. It brought $415 per acre, $170 more than what the landowner received last year. It seems record-breaking cash rent auctions aren't slowing down, but Rothermich points out it's not always the highest bidder who wins.
Landlords are in the driver's seat on a cash rent auction, and they decide how the terms are.
In fact, he says many times the landowner cares more about the land and how it's prepped and cared for than they do the final price.
It is not solely based on price. I would say more often than not, high bid does not win. Our landowners make a decision on a myriad of reasons. Maybe somebody wants to give a young farmer a shot at growing his operation to keep him on the farm. That happens quite often.
And as more landowners opt to negotiate through the open market, Bauman thinks the growth could continue to explode.
Well, I would say we're not driving up cash rental rates. It's your fellow farmers that are actually being more competitive, more aggressive.
As Rothermich crunches the cash rent numbers, leases via auction are drawing double, even triple-digit gains.
The year-to-year leases that are privately negotiated, they're stable. The 3-year leases that are privately negotiated are 5 to 10% higher. And then if it goes to cash rent auction, I'm seeing anywhere from in Iowa 25% to 70% increase in cash rents from the previous rent. In Illinois, I'm seeing 90 to 120% increase from the previous rent.
And as land prices start to plateau, it's a new way to cash rent that's gaining traction across the U.S. As you can imagine, this is becoming a hot button topic for farmers with fear of what it will do to cash rent prices overall. Some farmers telling me there's not a lot of upside for farmers in this, and as information flows more freely, they fear it actually removes the last few bits of security for renters. Well, when we come back, inflation's impact on the protein sector. Don Close and Daryl Peel rejoin me next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Golden Harvest. Broad adaptability, high yield potential, solid agronomics, great late season health. The foundations of a successful season start with Golden Harvest game-changing corn. Find your hybrid at GameChangingCorn.com.
Rejoining us this weekend for our marketing roundtables, Don Close as well as Daryl Peel. Don, we talked about your price outlook, both you and Daryl, pretty bullish on prices, but I know you have a caveat when it comes to your outlook and the longevity of how long these strong cattle prices can last.
I do. And as impressive as the market is currently, I just have some concerns that particularly the futures market is getting too revved up too early. I think that could leave the market vulnerable to a correction of consequence. And the real beauty, as we've said several times now, of this inventory situation, it's the longevity that this rally could continue.
This one I think will last longer than the last time we did this. Again, we're starting, I think, at a different place, a much tighter situation from the standpoint of the female side of things. So I think this rally will last longer when we do get there. But again, we're not sure when that starts at this point. So you could be right that we're starting a little bit too quick off the mark here. I think the drought of 10 years ago is still pretty fresh in people's minds, and so we're trying to anticipate it. Maybe we're anticipating it a little quicker than Mother Nature is ready for us to act on.
Agreed.
But Don, another one of those bullish factors has been demand. I mean, when you look at export demand, you look at domestic demand, even though we have seen inflation take hold of a lot of different proteins, it really hasn't scared people away from the meat counter. So if we see demand start to falter at all here at home, do you think that will impact prices, or is supply so tight it won't matter?
I think it's fair to say we've seen some softening of demand. We've certainly come off that seasonal peak in demand for ribs coming backside of the holidays, but underlying demand base in this market is still remarkably good, even though it's off from its peak of mid-year last year. The other thing, I think the U.S. is entirely vulnerable to recessionary pressures in 23. But if you look at the jobs numbers that were released just this morning, I think even if we do have some recessionary pressure, it will probably be short and shallow. If you go through an airport, go try to get into a restaurant, the movement in the economy is still extremely good.
Daryl, do we know how much consumers are willing to pay? If we see cattle prices continue to climb, and that does translate into higher retail prices, and that continues to move higher, what is that threshold? What are the prices that consumers are willing to pay, and what are they not?
Well, the thing is, and so far through 2022, we had record beef production, record beef per capita, or not record, but, stronger per capita consumption. But going forward, beef production is going to fall. So supply will be tighter. So it's a question of sort of who will be, what subset of the market will be willing to pay those higher prices. I do think there will be some some rationing, if you will, of tighter supplies. We won't have as much beef. So, overall per capita consumption is going to fall. So some folks probably will get priced out of the market, but that's part of what's necessary when there's a limited supply. And I think the end result will be, as Don suggested, that we will continue ultimately to push these prices higher.
One thing that I would add to that, if you look at where we have been this past year with the prime choice spreads up into the low 90s, the choice select spread is wide. Ground beef demand still incredibly good. So I almost think when we talk this whole demand base, more so than the last time we were here, we need to look at that by category of product and see where that strength is, because we clearly have retail demand for that ultra high quality product that we didn't necessarily have in 2014.
Any caution flags when it comes to export demand? Do you think we're pricing ourselves out of the market there, Daryl?
Well, again, there's going to be less beef, so we probably will see exports pull down a little bit. It depends in part on the dollar. It has softened a little bit recently, so that takes away some of the headwinds of the strength of the dollar on top of the price levels that we have in the domestic market. So I wouldn't be surprised to see exports drop a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that export demand is falling at all. I think the export demand will continue strong at this point in time. It certainly looks that way.
All right, Daryl, Don, thank you so much for joining us this weekend. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report. Please stay with us. Well, how do you go from being farmers to building the most gorgeous, detailed, handmade clocks? It's a story you can find at a museum in Iowa as we travel the American countryside this weekend with Andrew McCrae.
Frank and Joseph Bealey helped their parents on the farm, but it soon became apparent that they had a pastime that would become their full-time preoccupation.
Frank was the carver, and Joseph was the designer, or engineer, I like to call him. And he actually drew everything up on paper.
And when Sharon Cleve says they were carving and designing, what they were creating were some of the most intricate and amazing wooden clocks you'll ever see.
The first clock that they made was in 1913, called the Creation Clock. And from there it started. And I'm not really sure, they were carving before that, but I'm not sure why they started making clocks. But once they did, it just seemed like nothing else was important anymore.
Most of these clocks are taller than a person and have hand-carved figures that move and music that plays.
Anywhere from 2 to 4 years it took to make one of these clocks. We call them clocks, but as you can see, they're a lot more than that.
There are over 20 of these very large clocks to see. The entire collection the Bealey brothers created.
The Apostles clock is one of the favorites. Everybody who sees that really enjoys that. And the Village Blacksmith clock is another one that's everyone's favorite.
Perhaps it would have been an interesting story, just known to locals, if not for a prominent man who paid the Bealey brothers a visit in 1928.
I don't know how Henry Ford heard about these, but I'm sure that as wealthy as he was, I know he's probably sent his scouts out all over looking for things for his museum in Dearborn, Michigan. So he heard about these clocks, and he actually offered the Bealey brothers $1 million for the clock that's behind us here. And they turned him down.
That's the American Pioneer History Clock. The offer would be worth $17 million today. The pair turned him down, but the publicity soon had people from all over the nation coming to the farm to see the clocks. The Bealey brothers' sister, Anna, began charging 10 cents per head to see the collection. In 1947, the brothers sold the farm and moved to town when their parents passed away. Neither married, so they made arrangements for their priceless clocks to have a permanent home.
They actually willed them to the town of Spillville with the stipulation that they never be broken up in any way. The collection stayed together, nothing would ever be sold. So they stayed with the town.
These clocks mark the passing of time, yet the collection is truly timeless. Carvings of people and places that span centuries that still bring people here to rural Iowa to see the many clocks in this collection. Traveling the countryside in Spillville, Iowa, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Thank you, Andrew. And you can watch more of Andrew's travels on AmericanCountryside.com. Well, when we come back, who pays for the solar energy that's popping up across the U.S.? Customer support is next.
Who's really paying for electricity?
This past summer, the White House said the U.S. is now on track to triple domestic solar manufacturing capacity by 2024. But who's actually paying for the solar energy sources popping up across the country? That's customer support this weekend.
More and more frequently, we hear complaints from alternative power users, such as solar, regarding the monthly hookup fees they have to pay to the local power company, such as a rural electric co-op. Typically, the charges are relatively modest, $30 to $40, and should not be a big deal. The point is, the rest of us are paying for that infrastructure of the public utilities. Having the backup provided by those public systems is really the only thing making alternative power feasible. Since the government already forces the public utilities to buy the excess power the private systems generate, are you seeing any movement toward outlawing base hookup fees, which would further drive rates up for the rest of us? Well, thanks for the question, Jay, and this one was pretty complicated. The first thing to remember is the federal government manages the national grid and sales between states. Retail electricity and distribution are regulated by the states. Currently, there are 16 states with deregulated electricity pricing. This map shows which ones. Deregulation can alleviate this issue because supply and delivery can be from different companies. The delivery company, which owns the infrastructure downstream from the source of supply, can create their own pricing schedule subject to state oversight. In Illinois, there is no mandated grid access fee. Our provider does not apply one. A nearby co-op, however, does charge a monthly fee. In regulated states, those costs are usually added into one charge, so customers generating power may pay less for delivery since they use less. I'm guessing that's what the Oklahoma solar grid charge is about. Since it is an ideal solar state and even a modest array there can generate excess power, that is more than they use. Without deregulation, allocating delivery cost gets complicated. I do not have any information on electricity politics in Oklahoma, which can be really complex. And the nature of retail sales and delivery is so variable between states and providers, your situation may not apply to many other viewers. Doing away with the hookup fee will be up to the state, not the federal government. The larger problem, though, for the energy industry is shown here. We probably passed peak electricity consumption in the U.S., despite a growing economy. Consequently, utility companies are locked in a slowly shrinking market with increasing competition from consumer-generated power.
Thanks, John. Well, when we come back, we're going back to Cattlemen's Convention this weekend to see, other than drought, what's also on the minds of ranchers. That's as we're checking in with Michelle Rook next. Well, as we mentioned earlier in the newscast, cattle producers in the industry gathered in New Orleans this week for the annual Cattlemen's Convention. From cattle herd contraction to a rosier outlook for prices, there was a lot to talk about at this year's convention, and Farm Journal's Michelle Rook had boots on the ground learning what issues matter most to cattle producers right now.
That's right. Cattle producers here at the NCBA convention are talking about the state of the industry after the historic drought, a new farm bill, and USDA's cattle contract library pilot program. NCBA leadership is skeptical about getting a new farm bill done this year, but as the ag committees begin laying the groundwork for the 2023 bill, they're trying to make sure cattle producers aren't left out of the program. Here at the convention, they're talking about changes that they would like to see, including better risk management protection in the livestock revenue program.
I like the livestock risk mitigation programs that are out there. I think there's going to be some additional subsidies that may be available. That's going to help it make it more cost effective for somebody with one cow or somebody with 2,000 cows. You know, too often it's corn, wheat, and beans. They have a crop insurance program. We need something like that, and we are now getting that product. So I'm excited to see that develop and take off.
This is critical after the historic drought in the U.S. that caused massive liquidation in the cattle herd, which was confirmed in the USDA cattle inventory report.
We've been complaining we don't have adequate shackle space for a long time. So suddenly now that cow-calf producer is going to be back in the driver's seat. That feeder is going to have some leverage. Unfortunately, that came at the cost of millions of head. When you take the cow herd down that far, you risk beef getting too high priced and losing your demand.
Wilkinson says there is some profitability finally returning to the cow-calf sector, and the hope is it will finally move up the production chain. And of course, this tight herd was confirmed in this week's USDA semi-annual cattle inventory report, and that should mean some record high prices in the near future. Back to you, Tyne.
Thank you, Michelle. And she'll take an even deeper dive into those issues next weekend on our broadcast. Well, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.